Pete Hegseth went to the NATO headquarters in Brussels today and spoke with NATO defense ministers who for 3 years have been meeting and saying the same thing. This war is not going to end until we win. We're going to devote everything we have to in order to make sure that the Russians are expelled from every inch, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that have led to the bloodshed and destruction of Ukraine and not even getting close to any sort of diplomatic resolution. Pete Hegseth instead went and told these NATO countries, look, at least as far as we're concerned, you can do whatever you want, but as far as we're concerned, this war is, Ukraine's not winning this war, and we have to accept that reality. Here's what he told them.
Well, good afternoon, friends. Thank you, Secretary Healy, for your leadership, both in hosting and now leading the UDCG. This is my first Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and I'm honored to join all of you today. And I appreciate the opportunity to share President Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine. We are at, as you said, Mr. Secretary, a critical moment. As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. President Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is a top priority. He intends to end this war by diplomacy and bringing both Russia and Ukraine to the table. And the U.S. Department of Defense will help achieve this goal. We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield.
I mean, that is something that Europe has not heard, that NATO has not heard for years. Number one, that the goal is to end the war, not to continue it. And number two, that you have to be realistic about the state of the war, the battlefield, which is extremely favorable for Russia and extremely unfavorable for Ukraine. And if the war continues, it will only get more so because Ukraine is running out of soldiers, running out of people to send to the front line, whereas Russia is not. To hear this, it's like music to one's ears. This is the sort of thing that a lot of us have been saying for 3 years now and got called Russian agents and Kremlin assets, et cetera, et cetera. Not because we were rooting for Russia, but because it's just the state of reality that you cannot deny. There was never a way that Ukraine would win this war. Ukraine would be destroyed, Ukrainians would be killed, and at the end of the day, the longer the war went on, the more the Russians would have, because the less concessions, the fewer concessions they'd want to make, given how much they poured into the war. So for Hegseth to go and say what he just said is quite remarkable. Now, the next clip is Pete Hegseth speaking as well, and he essentially is trying to tell them that the conditions that you told your populations that we would need in order to win the war and to stop the war are completely unrealistic. Beginning with the fact that there's absolutely zero chance that Russia is ever going to give up Crimea, and we have to accept that. Here's what he said.
Want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering.
It is an illusory goal. This is what NATO has been doing for 3 years. They've been chasing illusory goals, things that could never have been achieved. Now, whether that's because they really thought they could achieve those goals and were just deceiving themselves, or whether they didn't care about those goals and just wanted to continue the war, who knows? Probably a little bit of both. But to hear the United States go and again say, we are not going back to 2014. Ukraine is not going to reconstitute its country as existed before 2014 when we engineered the coup, is something that Europe has needed to hear for a long time. The United States has needed to hear that as well. And it's good to hear that being said. That's not all Pete Hegseth said. The primary demand of the Russians prior to the war was that NATO recognized, the United States acknowledged that Ukraine cannot enter NATO, that it is unacceptable to the Russians to bring NATO up to the Russian border, that part of the Russian border in particular. And Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Kamala Harris not only made continuous statements that that would never happen, that they would always leave the door open for Ukraine to join, they made all sorts of provocative statements that they were moving quickly toward a path for NATO membership for Ukraine. Pete Hegseth had a much different message.
A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
I mean, that is an absolute declaration, not only that the United States will not send troops, but that the United States will not invoke Article 5 in defense of Ukraine, will not go to war with Russia in order to defend Ukraine. A position in Washington that was once conventional, and yet over the last 4 years has somehow been degraded into something that only Neville Chamberlain appeasers or Kremlin assets are willing to say. That's Trump saying, we're not getting involved in this war no matter what. Already, there are Ukrainians and all the Ukrainian fanatics throughout the West, including in the U.S., acting as though Trump is Neville Chamberlain, just conceded and surrendered the war to Adolf Hitler, all this idiocy that has gotten us into these issues in the first place. And this was signaled even before Trump was elected. Here are the Ukrainians, through their Kiev Post, trying to create this framework where if Ukraine loses the war, which they were going to lose in all circumstances, that it would be Trump's fault if he wins and does a deal with Putin. Here from the Kiev Press in September of 2024, so 2 months or a month and a half before the election, the headline was, quote, "Ukraine is gone." Before again calling for Ukraine to appease Putin, Trump runs through a series of verbatim Kremlin talking points, initially disparaging President Zelensky before moving on to the crown jewel of Russian disinformation narratives, namely that Ukraine doesn't exist. At this point, shouldn't Americans be asking who Trump actually works for? Those were the Ukrainians trying to interfere in America's election by trying to insinuate that Americans should believe Trump works for the Kremlin because he wants this completely senseless and extremely expensive in every sense war to be over. And you can see the Ukrainians were obviously rooting for Kamala Harris and the Democrats for good reason, which is that they would have fed this war forever. Here was the comments Trump made on September 25th, 2024, when he was talking about Ukraine and acknowledging unpleasant realities that no American leader or NATO leader has been willing to accept.
I watched this poor guy yesterday at the United Nations. He didn't know what he was saying. They just don't know what to do. They're locked into a situation. It's sad. They just don't know what to do. Because Ukraine is gone. It's not Ukraine anymore. You can never replace those cities and towns, and you can never replace the dead people, so many dead people. Any deal, even the worst deal, would have been better than what we have right now. If they made a bad deal, it would have been much better. They would have given up a little bit, and everybody would be living, and every building would be built, and every tower would be aging for another 2,000 years.
I mean, he was right then. You may not like it. You may wish it weren't true. The reality was that Ukraine had already been losing, and everybody in Ukraine and everybody in NATO capitals knew that, but were afraid to admit it. And Trump did, and of course then Ukrainian media, which as we demonstrated the other night, 80% of which is funded by US aid to disseminate propaganda, immediately accused him of being a Kremlin asset, saying Americans should ask who he works for. Here's Jens Stoltenberg, the longtime chief of NATO. Here's the sort of thing that NATO was saying. This was in May of 2022, so just 3 months after the war began, the kinds of things they were saying that ended up, just being not just untrue, but ended up really embarrassing the West.
So can I ask you whether you agree with the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine, who wrote an article just recently in Foreign Affairs? I mean, it's really interesting. He says to win, Ukraine doesn't need a miracle. It just needs the West to increase its supply of sophisticated weaponry. Putin may respond by calling up additional soldiers, but poorly motivated forces can only delay a well-equipped Ukraine's eventual triumph. Do you agree with that?
I agree that Ukraine can win this war, and what we have seen over the last weeks is that the Ukrainian forces have made significant gains, been able to retake, to liberate territory, and of course these victories belongs to the brave Ukrainian soldiers. But the support, the advanced equipment, the HIMARS, the weapons, the ammunition, the fuel that they have received from NATO allies and partners have enabled them and helped them to make these important gains. And again, the US has been in the lead position, but also European allies, Canada, and many other partners around the world are now stepping up the support for Ukraine.
So that was the framework for so long. Here was Biden himself in July of 2023, and he was asked about the relationship between the United States and NATO, and specifically Ukraine, and here is what he said.
You've said that Ukraine shouldn't enter NATO until after the war is over. Are you concerned that all of those comments could motivate Putin to keep the war going or discourage him from entering peace negotiations? And is there a serious risk that this war could drag on for years? And do you see any path toward the war ending with Putin still in power?
First of all, no one can join NATO while a war is going on, where a NATO nation is being attacked, because that guarantees that we're in a war, and we're in a third world war. So that it's not about whether or not they should or shouldn't join. It's about when they can join, and they will join NATO. The issue of whether or not this is going to keep Putin from continuing to fight, the answer is Putin's already lost the war. Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? And so the idea that there's going to be what vehicle is used, he could end the war tomorrow. He could just say, I'm out. But what agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin and what he decides to do. But there is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war. Imagine anyway, he's already lost that war.
There's no statement from Joe Biden that is complete without him interrupting himself in the middle of a thought and preventing himself from continuing because he's afraid of what he's going to say. But note there that he says two things. One is Russia already lost the war. That's apparently news to Russia. It's apparently news to the West because the West is about to end the war by handing the Russians parts of Ukraine and control over it, which they did not previously possess, and agree that, contrary to what Joe Biden said there, which is that Ukraine will enter NATO, Ukraine, in fact, will not enter NATO. And this is so predictable that this happens all the time. It happened in Vietnam. The U.S. fought in Vietnam for 10, 12, 13 years, kept saying we're on the verge of winning. When the U.S. finally left with its tail between its legs, the war proponents never said, oh, I guess we were wrong about our ability to win this war. They blamed it on war opponents. They blamed it on the people who tied one hand behind the back of the United States. War opponents never admit they're wrong. Same in Iraq. Oh, it wasn't that our idea of invading Iraq was wrong. It just wasn't carried out the right way. And this is the same thing that they're going to say here. They're going to say oh, we were on the way to winning the war, but Trump surrendered to Putin. The reality is that this war was lost, and it took Trump to admit it, to recognize it, and to end it. You have Joe Biden in 2023 saying Russia already lost the war. This is the kind of delusion that enabled this war to go on for so long, so senselessly. Just to give you a little bit of a taste for the discourse in the West over Ukraine, here is a montage put together by a good friend of the show, Matt Orfaglia. And here is what people in the West are now acknowledging, which is that the war is a stalemate, but what they had been saying all along about this war.
The Russia-Ukraine war is entering a stalemate.
The war has reached a stalemate.
A deadly stalemate. In other words, neither side can win because it's a
stalemate. Stalemate. Those are the headlines tonight. But are they behind? Like yesterday's news, is the real truth the Ukrainians are winning?
We know that Ukraine will win.
This is inevitable that Ukraine is going to defeat Russia.
Ukraine is winning this war.
Ukraine is winning this war.
Ukraine will win this war.
Ukraine is winning this war.
Ukraine will win this war.
Ukraine will win it because I have been there, I have worked there, I know.
He said Ukraine will win.
Winning the war is now not in question.
Ukraine will win, and it will happen very soon.
We can finish everything in weeks.
Victory will be in very short period.
They say Ukraine will win.
Ukrainians will win.
And I haven't met a single person yet who doesn't say Ukraine will win.
Russia is bad, Ukraine is good. What else do you need to know?
And it's a stalemate which only brings death and suffering. A true solution can only be found at the negotiating table.
YouTube bans RT.
There's no way the Ukrainian army would be able to win it.
Fox fires Tucker.
This war cannot be won.
Banned.
Ultimately unwinnable.
Defunded.
Ukraine is not winning.
Banned.
But everyone you meet, without exception, still insists that Ukraine will win.
We know that Ukraine will win.
Ukraine will win.
Putin's already lost the war.
I've never been more certain.
There is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war. He's already lost that war.
I know that Ukraine will win. Ukraine will win.
No amount of propaganda can hide the fact that Ukraine is winning this war.
I am absolutely convinced that the Ukrainians will win.
The Ukrainians
are winning.
I have this feeling Ukraine will win.
Ukraine is winning this war.
Ukraine will win.
Ukraine will win.
Ukraine is winning this war.
Extraordinary moment from the foreign minister predicting how this war will end.
Ukraine will win.
Truth will prevail and
Ukraine will win.
No matter what, Ukraine will win.
Ukrainians are winning.
Ukraine will win this war.
And Ukraine will win.
Ukraine will win. There's no question in my mind.
No doubts that Ukraine will win.
Ukraine will be successful for Putin.
And you could do this on every issue. It is just amazing how much crap, how many lies, how much propaganda our discourse is suffused with. And it's just an onslaught of people reading from the same script, having no idea what they're talking about. Americans' confidence in healthcare has hit a 24-year low. Our healthcare system is completely broken. That's why you see chronic illness and obesity and all sorts of other maladies all throughout American society. It's why I know I do my best to try and maintain a healthy lifestyle, and Field of Greens has really become an important part of that. We all know that eating healthy is key to staying healthy, but life gets busy and sticking to a perfect diet is not always realistic. Field of Greens makes that a lot easier. It's whole fruits and vegetables, and that's it. We can just all use more of that in our diets, no matter what. Just one drink, and I've got my healthy head start on the day. Field of Green helps you feel great and energetic and well disposed. So much so that other people will notice and comment on it. Every fruit and vegetable in Field of Greens is doctor selected for a specific health benefit. There's a heart-lung group, a heart health group, for your lungs, for your kidney, for your metabolism groups, even healthy weight groups. And Field of Green promises that for your next checkup, your doctor will notice your improved health or you get your money back. I have a 20% discount to get you started. You go to fieldofgreens.com and use my promo code Glenn. That's fieldofgreens.com, promo code Glenn. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.